We were sent to secure a research station in the Arctic. Nothing too unusual. But what we found out there in the frozen wasteland wasn't just cold. It wasn't just snow. There was something else. Something is hunting us. The howls we heard weren't from wolves, and they sure as hell weren't from anything human. Whatever was out there, it was waiting for us. But that's when we were briefed on the mission. We had no idea how much we were walking into. I am Sergeant James Cole, 1 Stone Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. It was 2012 when this all went down. We were stationed in Alaska, but that mission, it wasn't your typical assignment. The higher-ups called it Operation Icebreaker, a straightforward enough name for what was supposed to be a simple recon mission. The intel was clear. There was a classified research station deep in the Arctic, way past the Arctic Circle, and we were sent to retrieve some data they'd been gathering there. They'd lost contact with the station, and it was getting colder up there by the day. A retrieval mission, plain and simple. No big deal, right? We were briefed in a small, dimly lit room in Fort Wainwright. The briefing was nothing special, tactical maps on the wall, everyone going through their gear checks. We were given the basics, the station's coordinates, some satellite imagery, and the usual rundown on possible threats, wildlife, hostile terrain, equipment failure. But there was one thing that stuck with me, even at the time. Our team was equipped for Arctic conditions, of course. M4 carbines, radios, thermal optics, and cold weather gear, every piece of equipment designed to handle the extreme temperatures and isolation. The air smelled sterile, cold in the room, like we'd been plunged straight into the frozen tundra even though we were still on base. The only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights above us as the officer in charge droned on about the mission specifics. But then, something odd happened. The intelligence officer, a guy named Petty Officer Marks, was running through the station's last known communications. When he started talking about the Station S location, he hesitated. Not a long pause, but enough for everyone in the room to feel it. He quickly moved on, but I caught the look he gave the map, like he saw something there that didn't quite make sense. Right before we broke for the briefing, the interpreter, Staff Sergeant Reynolds, pulled me aside. He was an experienced linguist, good at his job, but his face was pale, more than usual. He whispered something I couldn't quite make out, but I remember the words clearly: "Don't trust the ice, and don't trust the silence." He was shaken. I thought it was just the stress of the mission. But now, I'm not so sure. We all boarded the transport plane, and the ride out was uneventful. As we descended into the Arctic, everything about the environment screamed wrong. The landscape was endless white, like we were flying into a void. I had a bad feeling about it, but I shrugged it off. You learn to ignore that kind of thing when you've been on enough missions. When we finally touched down, the base was even more isolated than we expected. There was no one there to greet us, no welcome committee. We were dropped off in a blizzard that made it hard to even see more than a few feet in front of us. The station was supposed to be operational, but it looked abandoned. A ghost town, empty and eerie, even in the daylight. The only sounds were the wind howling through the barren landscape and the faint creak of metal as the cold made everything groan. Inside the station, things got stranger. We found no bodies, no signs of a struggle, but there were traces, footprints in the snow that led to the entrance but didn't lead away. And then, the equipment, some of it was still running, as if the people there had just walked out. Everything about it was wrong. But that was only the beginning. The convoy rolled out early the next morning. We had all the standard equipment, armored Humvees, heavy-duty snowmobiles, and enough firepower to hold off a small army, though we hadn't expected to need it. Just a routine mission, patrol, check the station, retrieve the data, then head back. Simple enough. We even joked around during the ride, trying to shake off the nerves, the silence of the Arctic pressing in on us as we rumbled through the endless white expanse. It was easy to pretend it was just another day in the field. We made our way to the station in a staggered formation, moving as quickly as we could without overexerting the vehicles or ourselves. The snow had been relentless the past few days, and we weren't sure what kind of condition the roads would be in. But that didn't matter. We'd trained for worse. There was a strange comfort in the routine, the familiar hum of the Humvee engine, the soft crunch of snow under the tires. It almost felt like another day in the field, just a little colder than usual. The men joked about the cold, about the lack of wildlife, about how we were probably just being sent on a wild goose chase. After all, we were used to doing recon on isolated research stations in the middle of nowhere. But this time, there was something off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it gnawed at me. The whole place felt too still, too quiet. We had crossed into the village nearest to the station hours ago. The first thing I noticed was that it felt abandoned, even though it wasn't. There were houses, but not a single person in sight. No kids playing in the streets, no shops open. The streets were empty, eerily so. It was as if the whole place had been drained of life. The only sounds were the wind and the occasional rattle of the convoy's vehicles. At first, I thought it was just the isolation getting to me, but the unease was palpable. I could see it in the eyes of my men, too. We'd all been in remote areas before, but there was something unsettling about this place. Something felt wrong about the silence. I figured it was. Just the cold creeping in, the way it had a way of making people act differently. But then we noticed something else. The animals. There were none. In the villages, there should have been sled dogs, or at least some kind of livestock. But there was nothing. The barns were empty, the fields frozen solid, and the few animals we did spot were huddled far away from the village, looking skittish, as if they were avoiding us. We'd planned to make our final approach to the station from here, so we stopped to refuel and check our gear. That's when we started noticing more oddities. The locals, the few who were still around, kept their distance, watching us from behind closed doors or from the shadows of their homes. No one came up to talk. No one offered assistance. They just stared, and I swear I saw fear in their eyes. It didn't make sense. This wasn't a combat zone. We weren't the enemy. And yet, there was something about the way they acted that felt like we were intruding, like we didn't belong. As I stood outside my vehicle, adjusting the gear for the next leg of the trip, I saw one of the locals, an older man, walk past. He didn't make eye contact, didn't even acknowledge me. But as he passed, I heard him mutter something under his breath. It sounded like a warning. The moment lingered in my mind, but I didn't say anything. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't being told everything. Maybe it was the isolation. Maybe it was the way the wind whistled through the village, or the missing animals, or the strange silent stares of the people. Something was wrong here, but we couldn't turn back. Not now. We loaded up again, got back on the road, and made our way towards the station. That's when we reached the site, and everything changed. The moment we reached the station, something hit me. Not physically, but a heavy weight, a pressure that seemed to press against my chest, making it hard to breathe. I couldn't place it at first, but I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. The wind was still howling, but there was something different about it. It wasn't just the usual Arctic chill that gnawed at your skin. It was colder, deeper somehow, like it was seeping into your bones. The air felt thick, heavy with something I couldn't name. We started unloading the gear, setting up the perimeter, the usual routine. Everyone was still cracking jokes and keeping things light. We had our orders: secure the station, investigate, get out. But as I stepped away from the convoy to check the area, that's when I noticed it. Footprints. They were fresh, cutting across the snow, heading straight for the entrance of the station. At first, I thought it might have been one of our own guys. Maybe someone had wandered off to take a piss or scout ahead. But no. These tracks, whoever had made them wasn't wearing standard issue boots. They were long, deep, and wide, almost like an animal's prints, but too deliberate, too precise. I crouched down to take a closer look. There was something off about the shape of them. They didn't look human, but they didn't look like any wildlife ID ever seen either. I radioed in to the team leader, Sergeant MC Cree, and told him to keep an eye on the perimeter while I checked things out. He didn't seem too concerned. He probably thought I was overthinking it, given the isolation and the stress of the mission. But I had this gut feeling, and that feeling was only getting worse. We moved inside the station, the door creaking like it hadn't been opened in years. The place was colder than I expected, the walls coated in frost. It wasn't just the temperature that bothered me, though. It was the silence. When you walk into a building that's been abandoned for a while, you expect to hear something. The creak of the structure settling, the hum of old machinery, the rustle of wind outside. But there was nothing. The place was as silent as the grave. The station's interior was like a time capsule, frozen in place. Old papers, half-empty coffee mugs, even some personal items scattered on desks. It was like everyone just left. No signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, just a feeling of emptiness that clung to every room. We started pulling out the intel, scanning it, checking for any sign of why they left in such a hurry. Then something else caught my eye. Near one of the windows, the frost on the wall was smeared like something had been scratched into it. I moved closer, squinting to make out the shape. At first, it looked like a simple mark, a symbol, crudely etched into the frost. But as I wiped away some of the ice, I saw more. Symbols. Strange, jagged lines that didn't match anything in the standard databases. They were ancient-looking, like something you'd see in old ruins, not a research station. And there was more, not just on the walls, but on the floor too, bones. Not animal bones, but something smaller, sharper, like they'd been cleaned and placed there deliberately. I don't know why, but I couldn't shake the feeling that those bones were put there as a warning. I reached out to touch one of the symbols, but as soon as my fingers brushed the ice, the lights flickered. A low hum from the radio set filled the room, and for a moment, everything just stopped. It felt like the entire station was holding its breath. The temperature dropped even further, and I could see my breath fogging up in front of me. I pulled my gloves off and checked my equipment. Nothing unusual. But the radios, something was wrong with them. Static, interference. We had solid comms before, but now, it was like something was jamming the signal. I stood there for a moment, looking at the symbols and the bones. A strange smell filled the air, sickly, pungent, like something decaying in the walls. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this place made sense. I turned back to the team, motioning for them to stay alert. We were deep in enemy territory, but this wasn't like anything I'd prepared for. And then, just as I started to walk back toward the others, I heard it, a growl, low, deep, vibrating through the ground beneath my feet. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't a bear, it was something much worse. My heart skipped a beat. The growl wasn't distant, it was close. Too close. I turned to face the others, trying to keep my voice steady as I called out for McCree. But by the time I turned around, the growl was gone. The silence returned, and it was different now. It was heavier, suffocating. But that was just the beginning. At first, we thought it was just stress. We were far from home, stuck in the middle of a frozen wasteland with no backup and no way out. It was easy to dismiss the strange noises. The shadows we swore we saw moving at the edges of our vision. The kind of stuff you shrug off when you are in a high-stress environment. Everyone kept up the act. Jokes, snide comments, even a few nervous laughs to keep the tension at bay. But deep down, we all knew something wasn't right. The atmosphere here was different. And it wasn't just the isolation, it was something else. Something we couldn't see, but we could feel. We'd been going through the station, collecting intel and double-checking the equipment. The men were all moving as efficiently as usual, but there was this sense of unease creeping in. At first, I thought it was just me, but I started noticing it in the others. Glances over their shoulders, tension in their movements, and the occasional jump when a door creaked or a floorboard groaned underfoot. We were all on edge. Then came the real shock. At first, we tried to chalk it up to stress, the kind that always hits after being isolated for too long. We'd been in tough conditions before, long deployments, hard weather, but this felt different. The tension was thick in the air, heavier than the cold. And then it started. It was subtle at first. A low growl, distant, like an animal in the woods, but different, too deep, too resonant. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks, the wind twisting the sound of the storm. But then MC Cree heard it too, and Reynolds, the interpreter. His face turned pale when the sound cut through the silence. We tried to shake it off, focus on the mission, but it kept coming. Low, rumbling growls coming from different parts of the station. No animal I knew sounded like that, and none of us wanted to say it out loud, but we all thought the same thing. This was no ordinary place. And then the shadows started. I was in one of the lower rooms checking some old equipment when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, a dark shape crossing the wall far too quickly. I spun around, but nothing. The lights flickered for a second, and I told myself it was just a trick of the light, but the air felt thick now, heavy. And then I saw it again, just outside the window, another shadow, too fast, too wrong. I wasn't the only one. I saw the others glance over their shoulders, eyes wide, but no one said a word. We couldn't explain it. There were no animals outside. The station was deserted, yet something was watching us. And then the radios went down. At first it was static, just a little interference. But then it got worse, complete jamming. We tried to reach command, but there was nothing. No signal, just whispers, faint, distorted voices coming through the static, barely audible but unmistakable. That's when Reynolds completely lost it. He dropped to his knees, clutching his head, muttering about the watchers in the ice. We tried to calm him, but he wasn't listening. It was clear he wasn't just scared, he was terrified. But that was just the beginning. The moment we saw it, we knew we weren't dealing with something from this world. We were moving as a group, making our way through the station's eastern wing. The wind outside howled, but inside it was unnervingly still, too quiet. I thought we were prepared for anything, but I wasn't ready for this. There was no warning. 1 second we were scanning the rooms, checking for threats. The next, the ground beneath us trembled. A low growl, louder this time, vibrated through the walls, shaking the very foundation of the station. MC Cree ordered us to form up, but before we could move, a shadow darted across the far hallway. It wasn't the kind of shadow that flickers in the corner of your eye. This was something alive, something massive. We moved toward the source of the movement, the sound of our boots muffled by the thick, icy floor. My heart was pounding, my breath coming in short gasps, the cold air pressing in. We turned a corner, and there it was. It didn't look like anything I'd ever seen. It was tall, easily 7 feet, and covered in thick, dark fur that glistened with ice. Its eyes glowed a faint, unnatural green, and its face was wrong. It was human-like, but stretched, distorted. The creature's mouth opened, revealing sharp, jagged teeth, and the growl that came from it sent a chill straight through my chest. It was close, too close. I didn't even have time to process it. A burst of movement, and the creature lunged. One of the guys, Hernandez, was the first to react, firing his M4 at the thing. The shots hit it, but they didn't seem to have any effect. The creature didn't flinch. It just kept coming. It was faster than anything should have been, moving with an unnatural speed, like it was gliding through the air. Hernandez never stood a chance. The beast swiped at him with a clawed hand, knocking him back against the wall with a sickening thud. Blood sprayed across the floor as he fell, lifeless. I don't know how I managed to keep it together, but I did. I fired on instinct, aiming for its head, but the bullets ricocheted off something unseen, like it had an invisible shield. It wasn't just an attack. It was something else, something deliberate. A force, not just physical but unnatural. A presence that felt like it was bending the laws of nature itself. And that's when everything changed. We didn't have a choice. The beast took Hernandez, and the rest of us were barely able to react in time. It wasn't just the sheer force of the creature. It was the terror that gripped us. A panic I've never felt before, not even in combat. We were trained to fight, to endure, but nothing prepares you for a creature like that. MC Cree barked orders, but his voice sounded distant, like he was shouting from the other side of a tunnel. We were in full retreat, pulling back toward the station's main exit, firing blindly as we ran. The creature wasn't following, not directly, but we could hear it, its growls, its claws scraping the ice, getting closer and closer. I don't even remember how I made it to the front door. My rifle was jammed with the cold, and I kept losing my footing in the snow. But I kept moving. The others did too. We reached the trucks, piling in, scrambling for cover, trying to get the engines started. And just as we were about to leave, everything went quiet. Too quiet. The wind stopped. The growling stopped. The world froze for a moment. And then, the silence was broken by gunfire, ours. But it didn't matter. Whatever we were firing at, it wasn't enough. Our rounds just passed through the creature as if it was made of smoke. We kept firing, but there was no use. We couldn't touch it. It was the longest firefight of my life, but in the end, we had no choice but to abandon the fight. We retreated, pulled back to the helicopter as quickly as we could. As soon as we were airborne, I looked out of the window, watching the station disappear behind us. But the feeling never left. It was like we were being followed, like it knew we were still there, even if we were miles away. Back at base, they treated it like any other failed mission. Command refused to acknowledge what we had encountered. They called it a wild animal attack and sealed all files related to the mission. No one talked about it. Not even the survivors. There was no mention of the creature, no reports filed, but what happened next took things to another level. I can't explain what we saw out there. No one ever will. They'll never acknowledge it, and they'll never believe us. But I've seen it, and I know what's out there. Something that doesn't belong to this world. Something that waits in the cold. There's a reason they sealed those files. A reason no one's supposed to talk about it. If you're ever sent up there anywhere near that place, don't go. Don't even think about it. Sometimes I wonder if we were the lucky ones. Because whatever it was, it's still out there. Waiting